Welcome to I Love This Thing So Fricking Much, a podcast about passion. My name is Sophie Katz, and today I am joined by Kim, a writer and avid reader. Welcome to the show, Kim.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for being here. So, here's how this works. Kim will have 3 minutes to talk about something that she loves. This can be a person, place, thing, concept, activity, anything she wants. Our only requirement is that she loves it wholeheartedly and wants to tell us why. Are you ready, Kim?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Good. Got my timer here. Now, what do you love so freaking much?
Well, I love used bookstores, and I'm excited to talk about it today. So when I walk into a used bookstore, my first thing that I do is to go straight for the fantasy and sci-fi sections. I'm a genre reader first and foremost, and I'm all about looking through the stacks to see if I can find books with amazing cover art and interesting back blurbs. And, science fiction especially always delivers on that. I've picked up so many books over the years based on the cover art alone and discovered some favorite authors. And I don't usually go looking for specific books or authors when I go because I do feel like it takes some of the fun out of browsing, especially if you don't find what you came to look for. So for me, part of the fun that's unique to it is opening the door to finding new stories that I've never expected and stories that just surprise and intrigue me. So there are a few reasons why I really, really love used bookstores in particular that are unique to them rather than new bookstores, right? Like Barnes and Noble. So one of the reasons is that books can be kind of expensive these days. One hardback can cost around $20, and that's a lot of money to spend on a book you're not sure you'll like or want to keep. But at used bookstores, you might not be able to buy those new releases, but the books that you do find only cost a few dollars. I've been to shops where you could even buy, say, romance novels for like a quarter a book. I mean, it's amazing. So my point is that you can take a chance. You can try reading a genre you've never touched before, find even other titles by an author you liked, and read through their backlist without breaking the bank. I also love good book cover designs, and used bookstores are perfect for finding different editions of the books I love. It doesn't matter when an edition was printed, it could show up at any used bookstore. Time essentially means nothing, which is kind of exciting. There are some books I love enough to buy other editions for. In terms of classics, I'm always looking for different editions of As You Like It. I took a Shakespeare class in college where we did a study comparing multiple printed editions of play, and that was one I chose. But I think that exercise kind of sparked my long-term love for appreciating edition variances. I also love finding movie covers from like the 80s or 90s. My favorite that I've found so far is the movie edition of Stephen King's The Running Man. It has Arnold's face right on the front cover. Totally cool. Another thing I love is that people can be really creative with bookmarks, and sometimes they'll forget to take their bookmarks out. I once found a photograph wedged in one of my books. It was a candid shot of a bunch of people shopping.
Go ahead and finish your thought.
Looked like it was in a mall. I don't know who the subject was since no one was posed in the photo, but it's kind of a fun mystery. But my favorite one of all time is from the Better Homes and Gardens Hot and Spicy cookbook, which has a hilarious cover of a man looking terrified as he raises a spoonful of chili to his lips. But the surprise inside is that there's a newspaper cutout of a Kansas City chicken wing recipe. And then on the other side, there's an article about Jason Alexander, George Costanza from Seinfeld, which as a Seinfeld fan, that was kind of a nice surprise. I wish I could have read the whole article, but, it was pretty cool to see. So you never know what you find.
That's awesome. Thank you for telling us about used bookstores today.
Happy to talk about it.
I love how you talked about used bookstores as a way to find something new, because certainly when you say used bookstore, my brain goes, oh, this is a place full of old books, but you see it as a place full of discovery.
Yes, absolutely. It's almost like because you have access in a used bookstore to older books that are out of print that people more or less are maybe not reading anymore or they don't know about them, it kind of gives you like a freedom of choice to just be outside of what's currently trending, what the popular novels are, and just to be able to explore things that interest you without like a timestamp on them, so to speak.
I definitely found myself thinking about the trending books during your talk, just because that is so much of, especially internet book communities, is let's get that new book now when all it is a hardcover and very expensive. And that's not a great entry point for a lot of people into reading who might not be able to always dish out $20, $30, $40 for the newest book.
Absolutely. Or the many different versions of the same book as well, which they can be fun, not trying to knock it, but I do miss, I guess, more access to mass market paperbacks. I'm a huge fan of those. They're easy to carry, so your stories can go with you everywhere.
Tell me more about your love of cover art. Is there anything in particular that will catch your eye about a book's cover art?
So I know I mentioned before that, I'm a big genre reader. So I love finding like really weird, quirky covers, especially as science fiction, sometimes horror, definitely fantasy. Just looking to see it, what catches my eye. Sometimes you'll see some like interesting robot characters or these really, really weird aliens. And, it just makes you immediately want to pick up the book. The text inside might not be as interesting as the cover, but it is doing its job on me,
Is that often the case that the text inside isn't quite as interesting as the wacky aliens and fantasy creatures on the cover?
Sometimes, not all the time, though. Science fiction is the harder one because I will work my way through any science fiction that catches me that way, but I'm not hugely science heavy myself. So sometimes it's a bit of a slog to get through, and maybe other readers would enjoy it more. But I'm always digging around for the character development that's going on. And if you stumble upon a book that doesn't focus much on that, but more on the mechanics of the concepts that they're trying to get to, it's not as interesting narratively. But I always feel like it was worth a shot because you never really know. There was this one book, I can't recall the title of it at the moment, but I was reading it and some of the concepts kind of reminded me of something that the Loki TV show was trying to do with the different branches of time. It's kind of interesting to be like, oh, in the 1960s, somebody was thinking about that.
Yeah, it can be easy to forget sometimes, especially with how much hype there is around the newest movie, the newest series, the newest book. There's been a whole very long history of storytelling, and people have explored a lot of different, like, more stories and angles on the stories than anyone could ever read in a lifetime.
Absolutely.
How did your love of used bookstores begin? Do you have a particular memory?
Yeah, I think it really developed when I moved to Florida. I'm originally from New York. I remember in my childhood, we always had the Scholastic book fairs. There were tons of different regular bookstores to go to. Like we had Borders, we had Walden Books, there was a bookstore in every mall, there was a mall everywhere. But when we moved to Florida, where we moved specifically, there were like no bookstores. You had to go for a pretty long drive to be able to reach one. So it kind of became like a special trip to go to just a regular bookstore to go look for books. What ended up happening is that I just kept trying to search for any bookstores. And so I started requesting, like, hey, mom and dad, can you please take me to this used bookstore? Like, I heard that there's this thing, right? And then, of course, it wasn't until like after I graduated high school that we actually locally got our first Barnes and Noble, even, and still no used bookstores. So I've always had to like sort of travel outside my area to find them. So it always turned into like a bit of an adventure. So it's almost like not just going to look for books, but also getting to see different areas of Florida that, are not touristy, but there are really fun things to do. So it's sort of ballooned from there to the point where like I'm still always feeling like I am finding new used bookstores to go discover and go get in the car and drive over to, which there's probably no end to them. So it's fun.
Absolutely. It's become a lifelong journey for you.
Yep, exactly.
Is there anything that you don't like about used bookstores? And if so, how do you handle that?
There are like one or two things I can think of. So the first is that technically speaking, when you purchase books from used bookstore, if your focus as a reader and consumer is to know that part of your money is going back to the author, that's not something that happens at a used bookstore. You know that these books are used, right? People have owned them before, and then they move from bookseller to bookseller, or they go from customer and they turn into store credit and all that. So if you're going out there and you're looking to support authors, you probably want to do that elsewhere. But if that's not your goal or on your radar, totally fine. But I think it's an important point to bring up in case people are not aware. The other thing, though, is that you could find books that are pretty damaged at times. So bookstores can be pretty dusty. You could have pages that were very much well loved to the point where pages are falling out. You have mysterious food stains. You never really know. I think most of the bookstores I've gone to, I mean, they really do take care of their stock. But at the same time, I think it is a good rule of thumb when you find a book that you're interested in to just kind of flip through it, give a quick look, make sure that everything checks out okay, maybe even shake it a little bit just to make sure. But again, for the most part, I haven't had any particularly bad experiences with that, but I think it's good to keep an eye out for.
And like you mentioned before, sometimes you then get to find whatever they were using as a bookmark at the time.
As fun as that is, it doesn't happen that often. So it really does feel kind of special when you find something and you just kind of want to just dig into it. You're like, what is the like special meaning of this thing? Whether there is or isn't one.
It occurs to me also, you mentioned that when you buy a book at a used bookstore, you are not directly supporting the author. And there might be times when maybe you don't want to support an author for a certain reason. Maybe they are supporting causes that you don't agree with, but you still want to take a moment and find out what their writing was like or enjoy the book. And this could be a way it's like, oh, I'm supporting the bookstore and I still want to support bookstores, but not necessarily this individual author.
Yes, yes, that's such a good point. Because I know like especially when you're diving into older books, they're dated, they're going to have, issues. You're going to run across characters being treated in a way that is definitely not okay, especially not okay like modern times. And I think it's okay to recognize that and to still go on that adventure because there's always something of value, I think, in every piece of writing. It is really cool that you get to explore, you get to be curious, but then you're also not like directly contributing. Now, luckily enough, most of these authors probably are not living today, but it's the principle of it, right? You don't want to join in, but you are supporting the local bookstores, which I know over the years, a lot of booksellers have had to close their doors. I've been to at least two closeout sales where you almost feel like you're going to I don't know, like an animal shelter, and you're like, I need to
Mm-hmm.
adopt them all because I don't know what's going to happen to them. Are other bookstores going to take them? Or I think there was one I went to where whatever leftover books they had was just going to be owned by the person buying the building, and they could have just gone to the dump. So it's always alarming because you're like, oh, you don't want to lose these things, but you can't save them all either. I don't know, you get attached the more that you go, though, because they are well loved. They have history to them, whether you learn them or not, and you probably won't. You might never know how many people have read the book before it ends up in your hands. But I think it's the mystery that kind of adds to the experience.
It's certainly a beautiful mystery, and now, as the new owner of the book, you get to join that story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kim, thank you so much for telling us about something you love today.
Well, thank you for having me.
And thank you, our listeners, for tuning in today. If you would like to learn more about used bookstores or our guest Kim, you can find her social media information in the episode description. And if you have something you love so freaking much you want to tell me all about it, consider this your invitation to join the show. I Love This Thing So Freaking Much is a production of Through the Window Media. This episode was directed and edited by Sophie A. Katz. You can find us at Through the Window on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or Tumblr. That is THROU the Window at all the social media sites. Be good to yourself, be kind to each other, and you'll hear from us again soon.